Welcome to the Organic Gardener podcast today. It is Tuesday, January 15th, 2019, and I have somebody on the line who's having some pretty good success with his YouTube channel, I think because he's engaging with people and he's got some great videos because he's kind of new to the online world, it looks like, but it's been gardening for a long time. And his YouTube channel is called Savvy Organics. And here from Red Oak, Texas is David Selman. So welcome to the show, David.
Thank you, Jackie. I appreciate it. It's good to be with you today.
Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on already and so fast. Like, I just reached out to you and here we are talking together. And I just got a lot of value out of your video. So, but do you want to tell listeners a little bit about yourself and like what you do and how you got started?
Sure. Yeah. I've been gardening most of my life since I was a little kid, and life happens to you, and you have kids, your own kids, and we always had a family garden. So, but nothing that we raised more than a few vegetables for ourselves. And then in the last few years, I have with the kids all grown and moved out on their own. We have 5 acres, and so we no longer, need it for livestock and cattle that we had when the kids were in ag and those kind of things. So we just October 2017, and we kind of came up with the idea, what are we going to do with our land now? And I've always enjoyed gardening, so we really started watching others about their market gardens and their CSA programs and the reasons they do it and all the health benefits. So I just started with half acre in the pasture next to our house and basically started ripping the ground up to try to figure out what we were doing, and then just watch YouTube guys at night and learn as much as I could, as fast as I could.
So who are some of the YouTube people that you've been watching that you feel have been giving like the most successful advice from?
Well, some of them are the subjects range everything from homesteading to organic gardening, stuff like that. But some of our favorite channels, we really enjoy M.I. Gardner. He's really a good one to watch, and we watch Justin Rhodes, with Abundant Permaculture. He's got a really good channel. Watch his family; they do a vlog every day. They do everything from livestock and gardening. And then who else do we watch? Living Traditions, it's a homesteading channel, but they do a lot of gardening and a lot of with raising animals and things. So I'm trying to think who else.
Well, that's a good
I think
start.
those are probably the main. Yeah, those are our favorites.
Cool. So I always kind of start at the show asking about your very first gardening experience. Like, were you a kid? Was it when you were an adult? Like, once you had your kids, or like, who were you with and what'd you grow?
Well, as a kid growing up in town, at my parents' house, we had my dad just let me, get a small garden plot in the backyard, and other than maybe some squash and stuff like that, I don't really remember what all I grew then, but I always had an interest in it. And my parents had some lake lots on a lake not too far from where we lived, and I think it was like a quarter acre, and we had a big garden there, and I was always helping in that. But just over all the years, and then raising our family and stuff, the importance of teaching your kids, where food comes from and why it's important and nutritional value of it. And we're just, felt like to us good ways to raise our kids and give them responsibility and a good work ethics and stuff like that. So.
Sure. So did they do like 4-H? You were saying that like you had some of the land was for them doing projects, like were they 4-H or Future Farmers of America or like just home?
Yeah. They we were involved with the FFA for all of my kids. We primarily raised Longhorn, Texas Longhorn cattle and show cattle. and so we raised those, and the kids earned scholarship money for college
Really?
By doing that. So that's primarily what it was. And then we had horses, and we did the play days and the little rodeos and stuff for many years. But yeah, we've always had an active lifestyle with the outdoors, and we grew up hunting and fishing with my kids, and I did it with my dad when I was a kid. So some of those family traditions just get passed on.
Are you from Texas originally, like born and raised?
I am. Yeah, I have lived here all my life. I've been to quite a few other places in the U.S., but I've lived in the Dallas area most of my life.
Cool. So then, is that how you learned how to garden organically, like from your family lake garden, or just like over the years, or how did you get into that?
Over the years, basically. But in the last few, it's been even more important because, the older you get and you realize, I've been putting this thing or that thing in my food for so many years. And you kind of one day you just think, I wonder if that's what that actually does. You read the labels on some of the foods that you were buying and you think, I can't pronounce that. Why am I eating it?
Sure. I was just reading, there's
the
this woman, Vanny Hari, who's got the Food Babe Army, and she just sent out an email this morning talking about like different almond milks and different alternative milk products, and like just the surprising sugars and weird ingredients you see in those things.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many things in the food that people don't even realize there.
Yeah, like
and,
even my
so
friend
really,
Daisy was saying she doesn't like to buy, is it Costco milk? Because they like fortify it with fish oil, and she was like, I just can't understand that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally agree. We other than for a holiday or something to make an ingredient, as an ingredient, we really don't use anything except almond milk. We make it ourselves. We buy the raw almonds and make almond milk. We make almond butter.
How hard is that to like?
Sure
how do you do that? Do you just basically soak the almonds?
Yeah, I mean, to make the almond milk, it's really easy. They get soaked, and then they get ground up, and they get put in a nut bag. And after they're ground up and they're put into the nut bag, you just squeeze them through the nut bag, and what comes out is the almond milk. And there's just not any cleaner way to do it. It's only takes 10, 15 minutes, and it's really easy. And then almond butter, which I love because a lot of the store-bought things have so much other additives and
Sure.
stuff. The almond butter is really easy. We just roast the almonds at about 350 to 400 degrees for about 10 to 12 minutes, take them out, let them cool, and then we use a Vitamix to blend them into butter. Sometimes if they're dry, I'll have to add a little bit of oil or something to them, but really simple to make, and it goes a long way. And it's a lot less expensive than what you'd buy in the store.
Sure, and it is so expensive. And what a different taste from peanut butter, or just there's lots of uses for almond butter. Does it come out like the texture of peanut butter?
What we typically make is actually a little bit thicker, but it just depends on if you wanted to add anything like a tasteless oil, more like avocado or some sunflower oil or something that doesn't have any flavor. You can thin it a little bit by adding some oil to it, but generally the consistency is just as good as anything you would buy that's been processed. And that's what we're trying to avoid, are all those processed foods and all the additives that go into them.
Yeah, and I think like some people like think processed, or I know I do sometimes. Like I often wonder, like, is buying peanut butter and making a peanut butter jelly sandwich, like, is that still like processed in a way because the peanut butter comes processed already? You're not like just taking your own peanuts and like the jelly's part. Like I always wonder, like, is that actually making it yourself, or does that count as processed because the pieces that you're putting together are already processed?
I would say it's processed.
Yeah. So, That's great that you're doing all that. And nobody is really, I don't think anybody's talked about making their own almond milk. I was just talking to somebody yesterday. She rents mason bees. So you can buy like a mason bee kit from her and she'll ship them to you and you can keep them all summer and then you send them back. And we were talking about the bees down in the almond groves. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my son's a beekeeper, and we have one of his hives we keep on our farm. But he has sent all of his hives for the winter out to California. He leases those beehives to them for their almond fields. But the mason bees you mentioned, I've tried to get those to come to our place, and I have not had any luck. I even have a little house for them and everything, but have not seen any.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, she like their main goal is to spread mason bees around the country, and she said that they're great because they don't sting. They're, very super pollinators. Like they'll pollinate more way more
Yep.
flowers than a honeybee will. But I think there is some challenges to getting them to start, and then like I said, they rent these boxes out and you get like a PVC pipe tube with a bunch in it, and then some will stay and some will stay in your garden, and then that's a good way to get them started. But she said they do require a little bit of maintenance in the winter because like they actually give them a bath, and then there's these pollen mites, and if you don't clean out their homes, she said that's where the real trouble goes, is that those pollen mites grow and grow and the mite colony gets bigger, and so that they really clean out the homes when you rent the tube, when you send the tube back, and they actually keep the bees in their fridge and just do this whole system
Wow.
to help them grow. But they're kind of on a mission to spread more mason bees around. So I have not tried the
Real
mason
cool.
bee thing, but I've heard about it, and some of my listeners were asking me about it. So
Yeah, and I've heard that they're such great pollinators. And like you said, they're not as aggressive, and they don't sting, and yeah, they're just they should be. I don't know why we don't have more of them, but they say they're everywhere. But maybe they are. I just don't. Maybe I don't know what I'm looking for exactly. But I would love to know more about it and actually get some of those on our place.
okay, well, the one thing she was talking about was like different times a year that like there's like two different kinds. Like they ship mason bees in the early spring, and then in the summer they ship these, what did she call them, leaf cutter bees. So maybe like it just depends on when you're looking, you're not noticing them, or I don't know. So maybe you can
Yeah,
listen to that episode and learn about them.
I'll have to check it out for sure.
So anyway, do you want to tell us about something that grew well last year or this season? Like, do you have stuff in the ground right now, or you said it was like 40 degrees? Probably not.
We Yeah, it's pretty much winter right now, but we do have a few things in the ground. We have our first greenhouse we were able to put up this past season. It's 26 by 12, and in there we have carrots and spinach and broccoli and cauliflower growing. It's doing pretty well. But over the season last year, I think that the biggest things that we had the most success with were probably lettuces, kales, turnips. We did really well with those, and daikon radishes, which a lot of people don't know about or know how to use, but man, they are so good. I didn't know about them until I started gardening, but gardening here the way that we do now. But these daikons are amazing. They grow huge, and the flavor is really good. It's good in soups and salads, and really diverse vegetable. But yeah, the different lettuces, and we grew the typical dinosaur kale and the blue dwarf kale. Those did really well. The garlic did really well for us this year. So we had a pretty good season all in all.
You know what I learned last year from Megan Kane is that you can roast garlic. Like, I didn't know you could cook, right? I guess you know because you're putting them in soups, but I made so many sautés at the beginning of the year with radishes, and Mike had these monster radishes in like all these different colors, like purples and whites and bright red. Well, red you normally get, but just he had, there were maybe even some yellow ones or gold ones or something. It was just before the beets were ready. I ate so many sautés or stir fry, I don't know what you want to call them. Just like I take a cast iron skillet and just throw some avocado oil or some olive oil and a whole bunch of kale. I grew dinosaur kale for the first time last year, and I just fell in love with it. I was like, this is the best. I never really liked kale before I found that one. and then lots of Swiss chard, and but with those radishes was so good. How do you like your greenhouse? Is it a greenhouse or a hoop house, or do you have both?
Well, I call it a greenhouse. It's basically it's kind of more like a hoop house, because it has it's not polycarbonate enclosure. It's kind of a green plastic colored mesh that filters out some of the UV rays and stuff. But it was really inexpensive, and when you're starting a farm and trying to build any kind of infrastructure on a shoestring, it can be challenging. So I found this company. They're here in Richardson, I think, which is just north of us, and maybe it's Frisco, someplace right up north of us. It's called Delta Canopy Company, and they have all kinds of greenhouses and canopies of all kinds. And I found them one day and found this greenhouse that was, I want to say it was like $400, and I put it together one day. Literally, it just took maybe a day to get it all set up. And so my biggest thing was, because we really had one big failure. I had tried to make, before I bought this one, I had tried to make a high tunnel or a greenhouse out of PVC and greenhouse plastic. And the day that I finished it, we had a really bad windstorm that night.
Aww.
And it just crumpled it. It was, my wife and I had a good laugh. It was pretty funny for us out there in the wind trying to tag this thing down and pick up the mess. It was crazy. So I was kind of worried when we bought this one, is it going to, because our wind here is horrible sometimes. It'll be 40, 50 mile an hour for, a couple of days sometimes. And so far, it has really held up well. It has a lightweight aluminum metal frame, and then this plastic greenhouse plastic goes over it. Has a door on both ends, so it opens at either end. Has windows down both sides for ventilation, and the way the plastic comes down on the sides, it's wider than the greenhouse frame. So we put a lot of mulch and stuff over the outside edges of it, and then on the inside, I took those screw-in ground anchors and screwed those into the ground, and then ran a wire from the anchor to the frame on the greenhouse. And we've had horrible winds, and other than it moving a little bit, maybe an inch or two here and there, it has stayed in place. So I'm thankful.
I think that movement might be a little good for it, because it gives it a little wiggle room. We've had so much trouble between the wind and the snow. Mike's had, I think, 2 or 3 different hoop house, greenhouse type structures collapsed under the weight of the snow in Montana. And then nothing's more heartbreaking than looking out there and seeing your hard work just like laying on the ground.
I know the feeling. Yep, I do. But we every once in a while we'll have it snow, but nothing like you guys would get in Montana.
Well, it's funny. I know it snows in Texas because I got stuck in a snowstorm in Texas. Like the one time I was there, I was driving from New Mexico to New York, and I went through Texas. My first night, it was the day after Halloween, I left and didn't make it very far at all, and was just like in a total blizzard. I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But that was my one experience.
Realize. So yeah, we can get some snowstorms and some ice storms.
Yeah. So how about something like you're excited or new that you want to try next year?
Something new. Well, last year the produce that we grew, we really, from our friends at church and people we would meet here and there and talk to, people would just kind of, come to our house, or we would take things to church for them to buy, or, which worked pretty well for the amount we were growing. But this year, with our new garden plan and our layout and stuff, we should have a lot more produce this year. So for me, what's exciting this year is we're going to try to set up a little green stand or a little farmstead, probably simple, under a couple canopies or something and some tables, and just, have people come to us on Saturday mornings and buy what they want.
Nice.
Some of we thought about some farmers and some market gardens, they'll do like a pick your own, but I'm a little skeptical of that right now because what I'm hearing from people that do that is sometimes you'll get people that don't know how to harvest lettuce. So rather than cut it off, they'll pull up the whole plant, and your leaf lettuce, it'll continue to produce sometimes 3 or 4 times, but if they pull the plant up, it's done. So, but yeah, the exciting thing for us is to try to grow enough and to start to build our clients up by having them come to our farm. So we'll see how it goes.
You know what? This woman that I talked to that lives kind of near us in Whitefish, Pam Gruey from Purple Frog Gardens, talked about they had a volunteer day once a week, and she talked about one of the good things about that, like she really had to focus, like on that day, she had to really think about like just kind of managing. It's kind of like being a classroom teacher, I guess, where you're just like moving around and managing, and you're just kind of like interacting with the volunteers and just really focused on helping them. And then, and then the other days she would she would be very specific about there's nobody coming to the farm these days, and she would have her own days there. But she said that was a way that they really work good. And I imagine like by volunteering you got to, and that might be like something you might want to look into instead of like people coming to pick, where they're coming to volunteer and then they get to take some stuff home, because that way you're educating them and you're teaching them, and then they're doing it the way that you want them to do it. But it does take, for sure, working with other people on your farm. There's always pluses and minuses, and certain things that are gonna, you're gonna learn certain. I don't know, but I can imagine that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. I've thought about it, but not really done anything to engage it very much. But I think that's a really good idea.
She said it was amazing how many kids that she would meet, because they were pretty big farmers, I think, for like 35 years here in a local valley. I think they just retired, her and her husband. And, so many people heard about it. Like even if they were at work, they would like almost send them like good vibes because they couldn't go, where they were always like, I'm going to go one of these summers. And like other people, like kids that like were like, I remember the day we came to your farm, and now I'm older and I have my own garden, and just it built so much community around her farm, that volunteer day. And it was just something, special about her farm. And it's kind of a different concept. I mean, I actually am trying to get this guy to come on and talk about pick your own blueberry farms and things like that, where it's like a specific crop, how to have that profitable. So I'll see. I saw he was going to be a speaker at the New York Organic Grower Association conference or something. So, I think it just kind of depends, management, whether you're managing preschoolers or you're managing, volunteers, or you're managing, a farmer's market or whatever. It's definitely a skill set that takes, a lot of give and take and understanding and listening and trying again and just figuring out I always like to focus on what's been successful and kind of expand on things that are going well. That's the way I always like to look at my classroom. What's going well? What can I expand on, more than focusing on what's not working? But that's just me. Anyway, tell us about something that maybe, you kind of told us a little bit about your past greenhouses, but is there something that didn't go so well last season that you thought was going to go differently and maybe didn't turn out the way you thought it was going to? Did we already talk about this?
What didn't go so well last year? Well, one of the things was, as I said, I've been gardening for many years, and one thing that I could not make happen last year were simple beans.
Oh, I was reading that blog post.
It's like, what is going on here? We planted them no less than 3, maybe 4 times at different points, different times, different conditions, and they just wouldn't take off. They would come up, they would look great, they would even flower, and then they would just wither away. No idea what was going on. So the last round, I planted some, thinking, okay, here we go again. This still isn't going to work. And just a simple Blue Lake bush bean, literally a Blue Lake bush bean, and they were so prolific. They came up, they did pretty much the same thing. I thought we were going to be in the same situation, but they flowered, and then we were having beans like crazy. The odd thing then was I had to recheck the package. As I said, I thought they were Blue Lake bush beans. These things climbed everything. They went crazy with the vining and the climbing on all the trellises, and everything they could touch, they would climb. It was just weird. It's like, what is up with beans this year? I don't know. We never did figure it out, but
they were still Blue Lake bush beans. Were they bush beans or pole beans?
No, they were bush beans. That's what it said on the package. My wife often wondered, I wonder if they got these in the wrong package somehow, because those aren't bush beans. They really did climb like crazy. But yeah, trying to grow them, the normal times and stuff that we would normally grow beans, they just did nothing.
And were you rotating your beds, or were you putting them in the same kind of beds?
Well, the pasture that we started gardening in last year, it was the first year to actually grow anything except pasture grass. And so I kind of chalked it up to that. And, of course we had put in some amendments and things, but, that didn't work. So I thought, well, maybe it's because this is the first time this soil in the field has had anything grown in it. So I moved it to our kitchen garden, and I had the same result. Our kitchen garden has grown things for the 20 plus years we've lived here, but still the beans did the same thing. They came up, they grew, they looked good, they would flower and then die.
So do you think it was like the bees that nothing pollinated them?
No, I'm pretty sure they got pollinated because we have beehives and we saw bees everywhere. There were, yeah.
And you did get them eventually. You got a bunch of beans. So yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, but really, really late season that we got them. Like I said, probably the fifth or sixth time that I planted them, and they.
Do you think it was just too hot?
But then they turned out not to be.
Are they kind of a cooler weather vegetable?
Well, they're really good in the spring and in the fall typically, but our spring last year was not typical. We'd have periods of really torrential rains, and then it get extremely hot and dry, and we had several late freezes that
because they're kind of like picky about a freeze, right? Because I know Mike doesn't like to grow the pole beans because he says every year they get me and they freeze right when I'm about to harvest. So I think they're kind of tender.
I agree. I think so too. I know they really won't tolerate a freeze, but we thought we were well past the freeze season, or the last frost date, of course, but we did end up having some really, really late freezes, I think all the way into April.
Oh, I think our last frost date's like in the middle of June. So
oh my gosh. Yeah.
We're lucky if we can put things in the ground before the middle of April. Like my husband's always like, because I always plant my sunflowers on Earth Day, April 22nd. He's like, are you sure you can put those in already? And I'm like, yes. If I want them to go to seed, I pretty much, but I don't know. For me, it seems like it doesn't matter if I put them in April, I put them in June. They all kind of bloom at the same time at the end of August. And I don't know. I think actually I'm starting to think that if they're going to go to seed, it depends more on the variety of sunflower that I'm growing than when I put them in the ground.
Yeah.
Because last year, the ones that I put in the earliest never went to seed.
Sure.
So.
That's weird.
Well, I don't know. My husband kept telling me they were too close together and I should thin them out, because they were like mammoth sunflowers and I grew them in a small space. So I had too many together because I was thinking I wanted them for bouquets. And I guess maybe because they grew really tall and thin and they only had like 4 or 5 inch heads, but they never really went to seed.
Yeah. Well, I know, I'm pretty sure that sunflowers like corn and they're really, really heavy feeders. They really need a nitrogen-rich soil. So maybe they didn't have enough nitrogen to fully mature and get those giant heads.
Maybe. Let's see. I think the year before he had potatoes planted there, and then the year before that they would have had green beans. But maybe, I don't know. That's a good thing to think of. So, this is actually where we call getting to the root of things, which is like kind of like a lightning round. I don't know if you listen to other podcasts, but like Just
Sure.
supposed to be like shorter answer, whatever comes to your mind first type of question. So like, do you have a
Oh,
least favorite activity in the garden? Like something you got to kind of force yourself to go out and do?
a least favorite
Yeah,
activity?
something you don't really like that much.
No, no, I can't think of anything I don't like to do out there.
Well, I always think when people say that, that's pretty inspiring for other listeners out there, especially ones that maybe don't garden so much. But so on the flip side, then what's your favorite activity? What do you love to do the most out there?
My favorite thing is probably planting. I enjoy the time when we're actually planting stuff, whether it's our seed starts that we've raised in the cold months before time to plant, or whether we're direct seeding. I really because it's a feeling of here we go.
Yeah.
Spring is here. We can see how we do this year. It's just an exciting time, and I enjoy the planting season.
Cool. I like it when you put
You
the
know,
starts
you
in the ground and all of a sudden it's like instant garden.
right. But I will go back to your other question about my least favorite thing
Sure,
to
I knew
do.
you would.
And I give that a thought for a second, because I'm sitting in front of my computer and I can see the corner of a spreadsheet that I have for the garden. And the thing that has been the hardest for me to do, and I probably enjoy the least, is planning. I'm kind
Totally
of
understand.
an active guy. I want to go out and just do it, and expanding or getting a little bit, larger, farming, nearly an acre this year. We had to come up with a plan. So over the winter months, we've been working on a plan, and that's probably one thing I didn't enjoy that much, is planning.
I hear ya, but I'm kind of in the same boat. Because like when I first started my podcast, my husband was really the gardener, and I didn't really have much to do with it. And then since I've had my podcast, I spend more time out there all the time. And this year, and I'm very much like that. Like I'm the kind of person that like goes to the nursery like after the 4th of July, and I'm like, hey, what's on sale? What can we put in? And part of that's probably the teacher in me who's like, all right, summer's finally over. It takes me a little while to like, get into having some time and energy, but also, I don't know, but this year I've been working on this like garden course, and I've been like looking at if we're going to make the jump from Mike's goal's always been for us to grow enough food for us, but if we're going to try to like make the jump for stuff for sale, there's so many things I saw that we
Mm-hmm.
did right last year, and I'm like, all right, now if we make these little tweaks, maybe we'll be able to double or triple, or like to me it seems like ever since he planted this thing I call a mini farm, and like the first year he grew like 4 times
Mm-hmm.
as much food as usual. Last year he must have grown at least 10 times as much food as he's ever grown. And so as we keep
Oh, that's amazing.
going, but I'm very much more into planning this year. Like I was looking back through my garden journals, and it's like, oh, Mike's yelling at me because I didn't order the seeds in time again. Mike's like, I should have ordered the seeds. And a lot of times we end up getting seeds at the store because I don't order them. And this year I am like adamant, we are ordering our seeds in February, or before then, even like soon. And like, I'm not going to run out. Like I've
Yeah.
been out of arugula, and I wish I would have had a fall crop of arugula planted. And just there's some things that I'm adamant like. So I know how you feel. It's like it's definitely for me. I'm not, and then what do they say? Failing to plan is planning to fail. But I know I'm the kind of
Yeah,
person that comes home
absolutely.
and just like, all right, these are the seeds that I bought. Here are the plants I bought. Where do we have room to put them? And Michael roll his eyes and be like, oh.
Well, yeah, totally. I understand. Which is really strange, because I'm also a home inspector. So my other business, I do a business plan every year. Well, what are we going to do and how we're going to do it, our marketing, how our strategies are going to be. So, but I really didn't ever apply that to the gardening business. It's like, why? I put stuff in the ground, it grows, I sell it, right? What's the plan? But it's my wife finally convinced me, that we needed to plan this out. And so we did, and she helped me put together a spreadsheet that we basically just color coded. We measured and marked out the field where everything's going to grow, and then we color coded it, and then put in our 30. We're having basically all 30-inch beds, and so we mapped out on each of those what's going to go in it, and then the other side of that, you mentioned a minute ago, ordering your seeds and making sure you had them. Well, I have a box that I keep all of our seeds in, and I thought, well, I probably got everything, but I started going through it, and I thought, by what we had on the spreadsheet, we really didn't. There were a bunch of the things we were planning to grow that I didn't have seeds for. So it helped us plan that out and what we needed to order.
Sure. This one woman I interviewed who has a market farm, her and her husband down, an hour south of us from Lower Valley Farm, Mandy Girth. Like one year she posted on Instagram and she's like, this is like the best real life game of Tetris. And she has like all these index cards and she's like, each crop and like trying to figure out what's going to go where. They feed like 250 people off of their farm. I don't know how her and her husband do it. They are amazing.
Wow.
Like they have, between the farmers market and their CSA and everything, they like maximize their space just incredibly what they can grow. And so, but yeah, you really see planning. And then once you start to get like data back from what's worked in other years, I think you'll really see some like exponential success there. And that's what I'm hoping we're going to get next year too. But yeah, I don't know how many times seeds, like having the seeds ahead of time. And I just went through our seeds because I was like bound and determined to plant some herbs this week. So I have something, I don't know how it is that I don't have one potted herb in my house this winter, but I don't. And so I went and put some herb seeds in the ground. And then I also went and bought like those live growing herbs you get in the produce department and put them in some dirt. I don't know if any of them will actually grow, but we'll see. But I also was going through our seeds to see, and I wanted to make sure, did we really not have any arugula? Because I'm just going to grow some in my windowsill, and we didn't. But yeah, doing that seed inventory right now is crucial.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, how about what's the best gardening advice you've ever received? Back to my short, quick answer questions.
Yeah, the answer to that would be understanding the soil, and that's still a challenge. But the advice I received was you need to understand the soil, the microbial life that's in the soil. Until several years ago, it's dirt. I put stuff in it, it grows or it doesn't. But yeah, so the best advice I've ever gotten was from Val Nolan. She's one of my gardening gurus here in North Texas, but that's some of the best advice I've ever had. Was you really need to understand your soil and the organisms in the soil that take care of the plants.
Sure, that's been a huge. My show, pretty much like the underlying theme could be called healthy soil. And I was just on this panel. This guy Steve Sedair is working on. It's called the Healthy Soil Summit, and teaching people, because he's doing it on like a farm scale. Like, I think like where he talks about like 2,000 acres is like the small itty bitty size, and working with like no-till and permaculture techniques. And he's got some really cool watering system that he's like developed, that like you put the hose, like actually bury it in the dirt underneath the plants. That's really, I don't know, cutting edge, I think. I mean, I don't know. He says he's been doing it for 30 years now, but he's the first person I've heard that's talked about that. So.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So many of these people that we have admired for years, like the person you mentioned, and then people like Elliot Coleman and some of those guys that have been doing this for all these many, many years. And everybody listens to these gardeners thinking, oh, yeah, he's just growing a garden, no big deal. And then so many of us are now really getting into it and understanding it. So we're going, oh, yeah, I remember he said whatever. And it's like, oh, it's important now.
Sure. And it's taken me forever to get into the hang of like people saying, like, I remember when I first started my podcast, I was talking to John Moore back in like episode 17, I think. And like at the end of the podcast, I was like so nervous, like running the equipment and like getting used to what he was saying. I'm like, do you have any advice for everybody? And he's like, yeah, don't dig. And I was like, wait, did you just say don't dig? And he was like, Jackie, I've been telling you this for like an hour now. So sometimes you just have to like hear things over and over and over before it starts to really sink in. But for sure, soil health, getting a soil test, rotating your crops, doing, adding compost, and just growing cover crops. I grew my first cover crops this year, and just all sorts of cool little tips and tricks to help people be more effective and more efficient, because, gardening certainly is a lot of work, and you want to be, if you're going to put all that effort in, it's nice to have some productivity there. Anyway, David, do you have a favorite tool? Like, if you had to move and could only take one tool with you, what could you not live without?
Well, we just talked about no-till, but I'm going to mention it anyway, is our BCS tractor. Our BCS walk-behind, if I had to take one tool with me or had a favorite tool, that would be it. And I understand no dig, and we're really kind of a minimal dig. We don't do it just to do it. But our soil here is like concrete. It is thick gumbo black clay, and it is impossible to plant in unless you do something with it. So, the BCS has been a tool I really couldn't garden without.
Well, that's interesting because I'm pretty sure that's the same thing Mandy Girth said. her walk behind tractor. It might even have been a BCS. How about a favorite recipe you like to cook from the garden or eat from the garden?
Last year we grew something that I had no idea about called broccolini.
Ooh.
I'd never heard of it until last year. And so we grew it for the first time, absolutely fell in love with it. It's easy to grow. It tastes like broccoli, but a lot milder. It's kind of like between a green and broccoli. And we saute it with onions and garlic, and it's wonderful. The broccolini is just awesome. So easy to grow and easy to cook.
Cool. Broccoli is like one of my all-time favorite foods. Like, I always think it'd be a toss-up between pizza and broccoli if I had to live on a desert island. How about your favorite internet resource? Somewhere you like to surf on the web besides your awesome Savvy Organics YouTube channel, which I know listeners are going to want to check out right after this.
I hope they do, and I hope they find yours as well. Favorite internet resource? Probably Baker Seeds, rareseeds.com, Baker Creek Seed Company. We order a few things. They're really about seeds that are heirlooms and seeds that are hard to find maybe, or from other parts of the world. And they're always interesting plants. So a lot of the interesting plants are things we don't know how to grow or garden. We'll get some and try those in our kitchen garden. It's kind of where we test things out before we decide to do it longer term. But yeah, the rareseeds.com is probably one of my favorites.
How big is your kitchen garden again?
How big?
Yeah.
Our kitchen garden is 21 feet by 90 feet.
Holy cow. Well, that's a big space, right?
It's pretty large, but if you really want to grow enough and a variety of fruits and vegetables for your family, that's a pretty adequate size. Now, those are in raised beds. I can't remember the exact number, but the family garden is primarily in raised beds. So we have a couple of beds that are dedicated year round. We have one that's dedicated to blueberries, which they say we can't grow here, but we have a good harvest. And asparagus. We have dedicated asparagus beds because you don't dig those up or anything every year.
I'm trying to get one of those started.
What's
the
that?
Asparagus beds. And we're definitely putting in blueberries this year. We had I don't know if we put them in before we drilled our well, or I just know we put them in a kind of dry, shadier area, and they didn't do well. And I went and visited a friend of mine just like right over the hill last summer and saw her blueberries, and I am so bound and determined to make a nice bed of blueberries this year. And my husband's already got the beds picked out and everything, so
nice.
But I have been bugging him. I'm like, where are we going to put the asparagus? Where should we put some asparagus?
Yeah, asparagus, it's it's so prolific once you get it established. But on those blueberries, the biggest thing with those is just getting the soil right. They really want that acidic soil, and they want the pH to be pretty right, which is going to be probably in the 5.5 range. So yeah, you get that right, and you shouldn't have any trouble.
All right, good to know. How about a favorite reading material, like a blog or a magazine or a book, like anything you can recommend to listeners? I can do favorite book. Sure.
My favorite book right now is Joel Salatin's This Ain't Normal.
Mm-hmm.
It's hilarious. He's such a funny writer, but he's he has some information on
Yeah.
YouTube, and people have done all kinds of interviews with him, and he does the tours at all the different home and garden shows, homesteading places, and so yeah, Joel Salatin and J.M. Fortier would be another one. His book about market gardening is absolutely incredible, and I think I mentioned him earlier, but Elliot Coleman. Those are probably my top 3 go-to books for everything.
Excellent. We have both J.M. Fortier's The Market Garden and a bunch of Elliot Coleman's books. I have not. I've got to read that. This Ain't Normal, Joel Salatin's book. I'm going to try to remember to get that out of the library today. Because a lot of people talk about that.
Point. Yeah, it's good. It's been out, I think, for a long time. It probably got published in mid-2000s, but for some reason, I'm just reading it, but I really enjoy it.
Well, I haven't read it yet either, so always comes around just, I don't know. It's kind of like I say with the interviews, like the right guest is on when just the perfect listeners in the audience. And so I know I'll read that book right at the perfect time. So how about, do you have any business advice, David, that you think listeners would like about either how to sell extra produce or get started in like kind of market farming? Now, you said you were taking stuff to your church. Is this the first year you're going to try to really, like, are you going to try to go to farmers markets at all? Or you're going to try to have those booths at your house, the tables?
Well, I think initially we're going to try it here on our farm just to have people come here and pick things up. We really may end up going to a farmer's market or something like that. But being our second year, we're trying to just gauge it and gauge how productive we can be. We're still trying to figure out how much produce we grow and how much we have. But because we also raise chickens, and so we have almost 80 birds right now. So between the eggs and the produce and the number of people at our church last year was a good number for people to, for us to take it to them or for them to come by and pick it up. But this year, I really want to get a little bit broader and have more of the community come out and learn what we're doing and maybe buy directly from us. So we've tripled the number of chickens that we have. So hopefully they'll give us triple the number of eggs. Oh. Last year we couldn't produce that fast enough, and this year we really want to try to get the people coming here to learn more about what we're doing.
Hey. So we've gone through this interview, and I forgot 2 questions I wanted to ask you. One, so there's the one video about like sprouting the chicken food. So was that like you're sprouting the chicken food that you actually are feeding to the chickens, or you're like sprouting the chicken food seeds that you're going to grow in the ground to feed the chickens? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, is that what you're going to harvest? Or that's what you're like actually feeding them sprouted food?
Yeah, we sprout them in 5-gallon buckets. So, the organic chicken feed is extremely expensive. It's like $36 to $42 a bag.
Sure.
So it's really they waste a lot of it. So they're also not getting all the nutritional value out of the solid grain. So we had seen several YouTube videos about soaking grain and about fermenting grain. Well, we learned that if we buy the whole grains like barley, wheat, oats, peas they don't like too much, even sprouted, but corn, those kind of things. We buy the whole grain, and we have a 5-bucket system, and each day we add a new bucket because we feed 1 bucket every day. So
and it takes 5 days is all?
By the 5th day, even in the winter right now, because we keep the 5 buckets. We have a small greenhouse that we keep like our patio plants and stuff in, so we sprout the seeds in there just to keep them warm. Mm-hmm. But on the 5th day, a really high percentage of those grains have sprouted. So they're soft, they're digestible, and the chickens are absolutely loving it. And they're doing really well on it. But it has reduced the need for as much of the organic layer feed by doing the sprouting method. And because we use the chickens on our pasture, they're actually tilling and fertilizing, throughout the winter months. So I'll go out in the morning and I throw the bucket of feed out for them, and they'll spend the rest of the day scratching, picking, and fertilizing as well, and preparing our garden beds for us, or by adding nutrients and stuff. But it's partly cost saving in trying to reduce the feed bill for those chickens, and partly to produce higher quality eggs, because I really believe that they're getting better nutrients out of the soaked grains.
Wow, I'm so glad I asked this because this is awesome. So, all right, so a 5-gallon bucket that feeds all 80 chickens?
Yeah, we put.
And how much, like,
we put
it's a 5-gallon bucket, but how much is water and how much of it is grain?
Well, when you put the grain in the bucket, it's probably about a third of the bucket is filled with that mix of grains I mentioned, and then we cover it maybe 2 inches with water. And each of the buckets, so we have a soaking bucket that soaks overnight, so it's got 2 inches of water over the grains, and then the other buckets they're all stacked on top of each other, and I've drilled holes in the bottom of them. So the next day, I take the grains that we soaked overnight and I pour it into the top bucket, and all of the water drains through and gets all the other seeds in the 4 buckets below wet and keeps them moist. And that bucket on the bottom is the one I feed the next morning.
Wow, this is an awesome system. Is there a video that I can see on your website of your system?
I think I do have a YouTube video about that.
Cool.
If it's not clear exactly what we're doing on there, people are free to ask questions and leave comments about it if there's anything they don't understand what or why we're doing that. But it really has cut our feed bill significantly, and I think it's going to be
cool, because my husband keeps bugging me about that, because we don't actually feed our chickens organic food because I can't afford that. I can barely afford the $16 for the non-organic food. So
yeah, it is. It's really...
that would be great. And then the other thing, what about the microgreens? Tell us, like, the whole microgreen setup deal. Like, how does that work? And you said it was really easy.
It is really easy, and I just started my second round this week. The first round was kind of a test round to figure out what I'm doing, and I learned a lot doing that first go round. But I have a 4-foot shelf, set of shelves in our garage, and of course it's winter, so at the bottom I put a heat lamp down there, and on each one of the 5 shelves I have a hanging LED light, and they're kind of offset. And then at the top, I have 2 full spectrum grow lights that shine all the way through. And so I started by getting the 1020 trays. It's a typical garden tray, and filling it with soil and spreading the seeds that I chose over the top of it, and just keeping them moist. And then they typically sprout in 2 to 3 days, and they provide microgreens that are edible in the peas are the fastest growing. They're typically producing, we're on our second round, but they're producing, I just clipped them today again, and they're, so every couple of days there's a new crop. The kale and the broccoli, I think it's because it's cold and not enough heat, and they've been really slow, but they're still doing well. But on the microgreen, the tray, in the right weather conditions and the right temperature, should be able to turn around a full, complete tray in 7 to 10 days. And, here, each one of those trays is valued typically at $20 to $25, and literally it's like 60 or 70 cents worth of seeds.
Wow. Well, you think in terms that I don't think. I'm just thinking, look at the savings for, like, what I'm not going to buy at the store.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah,
that is a good way to, I mean, that's the
Dave,
way we should be starting to think about it if we're going to go to market one of these soon days.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I've had to get over, and one of the things I've had to learn is, you mentioned thinning something earlier, and I'm like, that's one thing I don't like to do is thin things. I planted it, I want it to grow. Dang it,
I
it's got to come up and
agree.
produce.
Sure.
But the thinking is a little bit different. Being a vegetable gardener for my family's use for many years is different than doing it as a business and doing it as a market garden, because that one little plant that I might want to save, well, in the family garden, that's fine. But in the business, that's not going to fly. You've got to think on a larger scale. That plant is actually in my way to something that I can produce on a bigger scale.
Good way to put it. Do you have any, like, what are some of the lessons that you learned doing your microgreens? And, like, did you get your seeds from Baker Heirloom or?
Um, no, I had really high recommendations from several people to go to True Leaf. I think it's trueleaf.com to buy the microgreen seeds. They're actually produced for microgreen growers. And so that was a really good resource, learning about True Leaf and getting the seeds from there. The price was good for whatever you want to grow, and they have everything you need. The thing I learned the quickest was, it's a lot of work to go out every couple of hours and spray with a mist bottle all your microgreens to make sure they're nice and moist. That got old within a couple of days. So what I learned is that there's two different kinds of 10-20 trays. There are 10-20 trays that have slots in the bottom, and there are trays that don't. So this next round, what we've done is we put a slotted tray on top of an unslotted tray, and we simply put 4 cups of water in the unslotted tray, and I don't have to water them. It just wicks it up from underneath.
Nice.
So I don't have to do all that spraying and watering.
Well, that's key, because just spraying those couple of herbs, Mike just keeps telling me, your herbs are dry already. Your herbs are dry already. You need to water those more. And I'm like, but I watered them today. He's like, not enough. Do it again.
Right.
They dried out already. Those are tiny pots.
Yeah. So I wonder if that would work for our seed starts. I might try that. See if watering them underneath and letting them soak water up rather than trying to water them all the time might be easier too. I'm gonna play with that.
Cool. Sounds great. Well, anything else we didn't talk about before I get to my final question?
I think we've covered a lot.
Cool. We have. And I see we've been talking almost an hour, so you're probably like, let's get done. All right. So here's my final question. It's kind of a doozy. David, if there's one change you would like to see to create a greener world, what would it be? For example, is there a charity or organization you're passionate about or project you'd like to see put into action? Like, what do you feel is the most crucial issue facing our planet in regards to the environment, either locally, nationally, or on a global scale?
That is a huge question. The one thing I guess, I'm a simple-minded guy. I'll keep this simple. If I had to change one thing to grow up, make a greener world, what would it be? That would be to convince people to buy local, buy from local farmers as much as you can, and to not always trust the mass producers. And globally, and especially here in the U.S., I know the monocultures, fields and fields of corn or soybeans or those kind of things. I just don't think those are good for the planet or the environment or for our pocketbooks or the world at large. I think that the smaller growers produce as much or could produce as much and at a much higher, better quality that's not processed and chemical laden. So I think that would be my answer.
Awesome. How about just a short inspirational tip or quote to help motivate listeners to reach into the dirt and start their own garden?
Motivational tip. Well, I'm going to go back to one that I try to keep in mind that I've heard one of my favorite homesteading YouTubers say, abundant permaculture, Justin Rhodes, and they did a farm tour all over America. And one of the things that got them started was this idea, this thought of, what would you do if you weren't afraid? And for me, that was taking those things that I'm passionate about and not just turning them into a business, but turning them into something with more value, something that that benefits my family and the environment and my community. And so what would I do if I wasn't afraid? It would be to start the garden, start growing my own food, start whatever it is I'm passionate about. It may not be in gardening, but what would I do if I wasn't afraid? Let's tackle it.
Excellent. So tell listeners how to connect with you. Where do they find your website and your YouTube channel?
Well, we have a website, and I'm not real good at keeping that updated because I'm too busy gardening, but the website is savvyorganicsfarm.com. And you can find our YouTube channel. Just do a search for Savvy Organics Farm, and hope people will subscribe to our channel. And then on Facebook, we have a Facebook. Again, you just have to search for Savvy Organics Farm on Facebook, and we'd be glad to have you on there.
All right, and I'll make sure all the links are in the show notes. Well, thanks so much for sharing with us today, David. I so appreciate you coming on, and I know it probably went a little longer than you thought, so that's what happens when you drop too many golden seeds. You were a great guest.
Oh, I appreciate it. It was really fun. I enjoyed it.